Hi, welcome to News Talk. I'm Stephanie and I'm delighted to be joined by David. Hi, David.
Hi, Stephanie. Hello, everybody. Glad you could join us.
And we're here today for the next 30 minutes for the latest in our edition of News Talk. So, if you've joined us before, you know how this works. We choose 3 stories that we think are interesting, maybe a little bit controversial, but definitely making headlines all around the world. We're going to discuss these stories, focus on some vocabulary, and what we'd really love is to know what you think.
Absolutely. Yes, please. Can we have your comments? You'll hear plenty of ours and we'll give you the gist of the stories, but we'd love to hear from you.
Definitely. So, we're going to start by showing you the 3 stories we're going to be talking about. As we talk through each one, we'll draw your attention to 3 key words or expressions, and then we'll talk a little bit about what these mean. Let's get started. So, here we go with our 3 stories from this week. The first one, David, would you like to kick off here?
Absolutely. So this is very current and very topical for many, many people around the world now, and we'd love to hear your opinions about it. But so our initial question is, what type of transportation company is Uber? Uber, the company that everybody knows, what type of transportation company is it? Do you know?
Interesting question. Type in the chat. Have a go. Have a guess. It doesn't matter if you're not right. It's fun to take part. So that's story number 1. Story number 2, we're asking which constitutional right do women in the US not have now? So we're talking about something that's been removed, been taken away. Have you heard about this story and which right are we talking about?
Again, this, as Stephanie said before, a controversial subject, this one. And again, we'd love to hear your opinion about it. And then at the end, we're going for a bit of fun. And we're asking which city, according to one survey, is the most livable city in the world. You probably think it's yours, but we'll show you what the research shows us.
And if you've joined us before, you'll know how much David loves a statistic. So I cannot wait to find out what kind of statistics he's going to be telling us in that last story there. I'm sure he's got lots for me to guess.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you think you know the answers, type in. If you don't, no problem, you will find out in a moment because we're going to get started with story number 1. Okay, story number 1, all about rideshare drivers. Now, this is a story originating from Australia. And rideshare drivers in Australia currently work with no federal law regulating their income or safety. They have no rights to a minimum wage, workers' compensation, or unfair dismissal. But that could be about to change in an agreement made between the Transport Workers Union and Uber, which looks at better protecting the gig economy workers.
So, a really interesting story. Does anybody work in the gig economy, or do you know anybody who works in the gig economy? Apparently, there are 1.6 billion people who do.
Absolutely. That's 1 in 6 adults in the UK who have a gig job at least once a week. So it really is a growing trend. It's something that more and more people are doing. And I suspect possibly the world of work following the pandemic has changed a lot, and people are looking at other sources of income and perhaps not having that one regular job that was traditional in the past.
I think that's a really important point, isn't it? And of course, the advantages are for workers who want to work in the gig economy, of course, are like things like flexibility, independence, variety, and it is apparently it is quite possible to earn quite a lot of money if you are prepared to work very long hours.
That's the thing. You've got to have that mindset to put in the time, the flexibility as well. And I think you need to be quite organized to manage all these different things at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, but on the downside, then of course, it is, as you were saying, it's unregulated. So workers, they have no insurance, there's no retirement, no pension plans. Um, I think that the worker themselves are responsible for paying their own taxes, not the company. And of course, I think for some of the jobs, it's really, really quite stressful.
Absolutely. I mean, it's weighing it up, isn't it? That the big advantage is that flexibility. You are your own boss. You can accept work, you can turn down work. But on the flip side of that, of course, you've got the lack of security that for a lot of people, of course, is very, very important.
And do you know, Stephanie, do you know the top three jobs in the gig economy? Or can anybody help? I think you've got a clue there in the picture for those people who can see it. But what are the top three jobs?
I could guess some jobs. I'm not sure if they're going to be in the top three. So perhaps if you are watching us live and you'd like to help me out here, why not type in what kind of jobs do you think? I mean, I think as David said, delivery drivers will possibly feature in the top three. Amelia, yes, taxi drivers. I was going to guess that one as well. Taxi drivers, possibly, David?
Indeed, absolutely. So, of course, they're not taxi drivers, are they? Because they're not taxis, but they're called ride share drivers. So, if you work for a company like Uber or Lyft, you are a ride share driver. So you share your car effectively, don't you? That's certainly the top one. Messengers, I think, fall under the same category. Um, and then number two is actually, as is shown in the picture there, it's the food delivery drivers who tend to use other forms of transport because it's in cities. So bicycles or scooters can mean that they can get to their client very, very quickly.
And again, I think talking about how the situation has changed post pandemic, this kind of idea of having food delivered to your home has really, really grown. Certainly here in the UK. I mean, if you go out around dinner time, the number of delivery drivers zooming around the city, taking people their dinners is quite incredible. And again, interesting to know what it's like with other people watching around the world. Is it a very popular option to have your dinner delivered where you live?
I have to admit, I have never used uh, one of these services. Have you?
Yes, I have.
It's good. I mean, why not? I think
And
you're
it's
the
very
norm.
easy. You have the app. It remembers orders that you like. It remembers restaurants that you like. It sends you promotions. And also, I think it's very easy to, if you're in a household with people who have different tastes, you don't have to order all in the same restaurant. So
Of
it
course.
is convenient like that as well.
Good. Yes, yes. And greetings from the swimming pool we have in Catalonia in Spain. That's very nice. I think that's where we should all be today, actually, on today like today. Um, and but the third, we were talking about the third most popular job, as I understand it, because we do have things like personal shoppers, freelance, especially online. But the third, apparently, is pet sitters.
Oh, pet
So
sitters, that's an
it's
interesting
pet
one.
sitters. So you call somebody to come to your home and look after your pet for you, your dog or your cat, or they take your dog for a walk. I don't think they would take your cat for a walk, but certainly your dog. And that's very popular.
Again, please type in the comments, let us know. Have you ever used the services of what do they call, David? Pet sitters?
Yes.
Of a pet sitter in your country. Would you be interested in using it? Why not type in the chat? Let us know. It's nice to hear your opinions and comments.
So, shall we have a look at the vocabulary then? I think that this
Absolutely.
first one, this use of the word gig and the gig economy is so prevalent now. It's a really, really important piece of vocabulary. So the gig economy, as we say, so this is the sector that comprises temporary jobs where people do separate pieces of work rather than working for one single employer.
Absolutely. And as David said, really, really common to read and to hear those words about nowadays. So, again, type in the chat, let us know if you have experience of the gig economy. Our second word that we were focusing on, regulating. Now, hopefully, you noticed I said that in Australia currently there is no federal law regulating rideshare drivers' income or safety. If something is regulating, it means governing, monitoring, and ensuring that standards are met.
And then finally, we talked about unfair dismissal in the workplace. So this is where you are fired or you are let go unjustly or illegally. And of course, normally, if you are in regulated employment, then you would have a right for compensation or to go to court. But in this economy, in the gig economy, you have no rights.
Absolutely. Let's move on then to story number 2.
But just before we do, I think if anybody has a pet, wants to be a pet sitter, Ellen, also in Barcelona, would love you to get in touch because she has a cat that is in desperate need of looking after.
Lovely. Let's move on then to story number 2, and it's over to you, David.
Yes, this is the controversial topic that we're looking at. So. The Vatican has welcomed this decision by the US Supreme Court, which effectively ends the women's right, a woman's right, constitutional right to abortion in the United States. So the Vatican, which of course is the center of the Catholic religion, says that the fact that a large country like the US has changed its position on this issue also challenges the whole world. So the Vatican believes that this is the attitude that everybody should adopt. They say the protection and defense of human life is not an issue that can remain confined to individuals, but instead is a matter of broad social significance. It will be really interesting to, I'm sure you've seen this in the news, what you feel about this. You may be pro or anti-abortion. It would be great to hear from you. So the concern, because the ruling from by the judges means that possibly half the states in the United States will criminalize abortion after a certain period. And of course, there has been a lot of backlash against this. These are from groups and ex-presidents like President Obama, who are against this ruling.
Absolutely. Now, as David mentioned, an incredibly controversial topic. And if you've joined us before, you'll know that we've also looked at other controversial topics, and indeed that word itself, meaning polarized opinions. So people have very strong opinions on this topic, and it's a very complex topic. But if you would like to share what you think in the chat, that would be lovely.
I think what's interesting, of course, is that there is in many countries it's not black and white. It's not either or. I think most countries they have certain rules when it is possible to have an abortion, and I think generally it's not prohibited when it's necessary to save the mother's life, the woman's life.
Absolutely, on health grounds.
Indeed. And the position in the UK, for example, is that I think you can have the legal limit for an abortion is 24 weeks. And I don't know what people think about that, what the rules and the laws are in their own countries.
And it does vary dramatically. I mean, if you start to do a little bit of research on this topic and you look at a world map, it really is a divisive issue. And there are countries that do still ban this completely outright. quite a few countries that it's completely illegal to have an abortion. As David mentioned, there is also a proportion of countries where it does depend, and on a case by case basis, depending on the situation. I think what's interesting here is that very unusual for a ruling to go back to a previous ruling. So instead of it being decriminalized, and we looked at that word last week, this time it's going back to being criminalized again. And I think that's what shocked a lot of viewers and commentators on this topic.
Indeed, yes. I think the number of countries where abortion is freely available on request for any reason is very limited. I think most countries have very strict rules to this. It's a question of saving life or physical, mental health, or when there are cases, unfortunately, like rape and incest.
Absolutely. I mean, and it was interesting to note that immediately after the ruling, 20 states in the US immediately enforced it and made it illegal. Now, this was especially in central and southern US states, as perhaps might be expected. They immediately enacted this ruling, with other states expected to follow.
Yeah, and I think the ban will come into effect after 6 weeks. So I think that after that period, it will be extremely difficult to be able to have an abortion. I think what was also interesting is that I read this report from Amnesty International, and their concern is that, according to their research, 1 in 4 pregnancies actually end in abortion. And there are 25 million unsafe abortions each year. So this is a very negative impact that this will have, because their argument is that if you criminalize abortion, it doesn't mean you stop abortions, you just make them unsafe.
And that's the key point, I think, isn't it? At the end of the day, people wanting to keep people safe. And if they can't have an abortion in a safe, legal way, it will force people perhaps to take other more serious and unsafe options.
Yeah, Amelia, thank you. I mean, she's saying in the Czech Republic, there, abortion it's a woman's right, it's a woman's decision.
Shall we look at some of the vocabulary here, David?
Absolutely.
So, starting off with the word ruling. Ruling is a legal decision made by judges.
And then we have this word again that Stephanie said that we covered last week, and it's interesting how many words do come up again in news stories. But to criminalize is to make something illegal. So criminalizing is making something illegal.
Absolutely. And as David mentioned, we had decriminalizing. So notice the relationship between the words. And as David said, words coming up and again and again. Our final word, backlash. Now, this is an interesting one. A backlash is a strong and powerful reaction against something. And David mentioned the backlash against this decision. So, a lot of people feeling very strongly and reacting vocally on social media and in different types of media against this decision.
And of course, many protests in many cities across the United States. And yes, Ricardo, I couldn't agree more. This subject is far too serious to give any light comment, but we did think it's important to cover this. And I think then that is our cue to move on to something a little less heavy, a little more light-hearted.
Absolutely. And the perfect topic to finish with today. We're talking about the top 10 most livable cities 2022. Perhaps controversial in a different way, because again, I expect a lot of people will have strong opinions. Does anyone recognize the skyline in this picture? Which city am I going to be talking about? Well, if you're looking to move to the best city in the world, then you need to go to, wait for it, Vienna. I wonder if anybody guessed that. In the latest livability survey of 173 countries, the Austrian capital took first place. Now, Copenhagen was in second and Zurich in third. Now, when making the decision, the survey considered factors such as political stability, healthcare, education, culture, environment, and infrastructure.
So I think that's really, really interesting. And actually, I think it was something like, most of the cities were in the European continent and three others in Canada were in the top 10. I wonder what everybody thinks about that. Would they like to propose their city as most livable?
And why? I think we'd need to know why.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and again, I think so. This was a survey from the Economist, and yeah, it's interesting that they've chosen based on the factors that you've outlined there, Stephanie. But another survey that I've looked at has chosen a couple of different factors at least. I mean, has anybody else got any ideas of factors you would take into account when choosing your most livable city?
Now, Amelia says, what about London? Well, apparently, London has moved down, and that's due to increased living expenses. The cost of living in London, very, very expensive. So, because of the increased costs, London has actually moved down and is no longer, it's definitely not in the top 10 here.
So, any ideas, Stephanie, on any other factors you might take into account, or anybody else?
Okay, I can see some comments. Amelia says, what about Paris? Okay, Amelia, what factors would you say make Paris the most livable city? Because again, I would imagine high cost of living in Paris. Perhaps that's an important factor when we talk about livability. I mean, the cost of rent, buying a house has got to be taken into consideration.
I think that is absolutely that I didn't see in the ranking that we saw. That didn't come up, and affordability, being able to afford to live in the city, I think is absolutely essential.
Key.
That should be a key deciding factor. Are your cities affordable? Or, as Stephanie says, many people are struggling in our country. If you want to live in London, it's virtually impossible unless you've got a very highly paid job.
Absolutely. I think that's the key point. A lot of people would like to live there, but just can't afford to do so. So it's all very well thinking about the culture. I'm sure there's, obviously in London, fantastic museums, great culture, but if you can't afford to live there, then very difficult to access it. Raphael says, what about Barcelona?
Well, I am biased because I love the city, but Rafa, could you explain why you think it should be up there? I mean, is it affordable? Would you argue it's affordable now?
And interesting to ask as well if anyone has actually been to Vienna or if anybody watching lives in Vienna. I would love to go. I haven't actually been to Vienna. David, have you?
I have actually, yes. It's a very, very attractive, beautifully maintained city. I'm not sure if I would want to live there though. It's always interesting, isn't it? I think there are cities that are wonderful to visit, and there are cities where you think, I would definitely like to live there.
I can imagine living there. Amelia's saying, I went to Vienna. It's similar to Prague. What about Prague, Amelia? Would you argue that it's the top most livable city in 2022? I have actually been to Prague and I do agree that it's a very beautiful city.
I think Ricardo's making a point about life expectancy. So I think that goes to the quality, that goes to the environment, doesn't it? If you are living well and you can live well and you've got green environments, it is going to give you a better life, isn't it?
Absolutely, and a more attractive city as well, definitely.
Um, but the one or the big factor that I think is missing from this is the which might go to Raphael's point is climate and weather. Is that not quite a big determining factor as to, if you were allowed to choose where to live, wouldn't the weather and the climate be quite key?
Interesting. I definitely think I would need to live in a city with seasons. I do like to have four distinct seasons. I like to see the change in season and the different feelings and the different nature around as well. Even if you're in a city with parks, you can really feel the change of the season. So I think that's a good point, David. I wouldn't like to live in a city that stays the same temperature all year round. So weather would be important for me.
Yeah, yeah. Shirley is definitely in favour of Lisbon. Yes, I agree as well. Another fantastic, fantastic city. And then, of course, you can have Emilia would actually prefer to live in the countryside and not the city. Why not?
Shirley's saying, or some small town in Holland. Another interesting point there. Why not? I mean, there's so many to choose from. I imagine it must have been very, very difficult for the people compiling this survey.
Indeed, indeed, and of course, I think the other factors that are sort of included. I think uh, that people naturally think about the value of their home. If you
Hmm.
are if you are investing in a home, will it go up in value? That might be quite an important one. And of course, for many families in particular, then schools and education is absolutely critical. I know in our country, people will actually move. They will
Mm,
move town, they will move city if they can get their children into good schools.
absolutely. It's called the catchment area, isn't it? Literally the area that catches you into a certain school. So as David said, if a school has a very good reputation, parents are very, very keen to live in that area to enroll their child in that particular school. So again, if you have a family, a key consideration there. Abdul Karim saying he likes London and Amsterdam.
Good, good. So do I. And then of course there is, I think, sometimes we can't have that much choice because decisions are made for us. For example, your family. Many people want to live near their family, and the idea of living far away from them, it just isn't an option.
Very good point there, David. Shall we have a look at the words in a bit more detail?
Absolutely.
So we started with a survey. I said in the latest livability survey. Now, a survey, of course, is an attempt to find out the opinions of a group of people, for example, the general public, by asking a series of questions.
Yes. So we often have people who have surveys when you're out shopping in the street. It can be a little bit irritating at times when they stop you and ask you lots of questions.
And
Um,
lots of online surveys as well. When you
oh,
purchase something, immediately you
constant.
get that survey. How did we do? How could we improve?
Yes, yes. How can we improve? Let's ask. And then we've got factors, and of course, factors are the things that should be taken into consideration when you decide something. So we've been talking about lots of factors you should take into account when deciding where you live.
And finally, I talked about infrastructure. Now, this is one of the factors that were taken into consideration. And infrastructure really key when we're thinking about a livable city, because it means the basic systems and services that a country or organization even uses in order to work effectively. That's infrastructure. So a really key word there.
Absolutely. Vital, vital. Yes. So, thank you all for joining us again. And this is you will find these reports as part of our newsflash series on our website. So just go along there and you'll find lots and lots more news articles to help you practice your English. And don't forget, we will be back. We'll be back again next week. But please, next week, we've got a slight change. It'll be on Wednesday at this time. Next Wednesday, not Monday, just for next week. So hope you can join us then. And thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. And as David said, really fantastic way to improve your English. So we're using real English here. This is authentic material. And David and I talk very naturally. It's not scripted at all. So we do look forward to seeing you next week for some more interesting and possibly controversial news topics. Goodbye for now.
Okay, bye-bye.